Just to start, gents, then let's look at where we are with messaging right now. Obviously, from our data, we're seeing good growth in the A2P SMS space. Obviously, there's a lot of hype around other platforms. Where do you think messaging stands, and why? Is it in good health? Why is it in good health? And what do you think that will mean for the coming 12 months? Matt, start with you, and then work our way back.
All right. So I think definitely, like you said, numbers are growing. The industry is definitely in good health. There is the opportunity for optimization. That's what the problem that we are trying to solve, which, you mentioned gray routes during your presentation, but there is still opportunities for anti-spam, for spam blocking, for all malicious messaging. And definitely we see right now the messaging industry is very basic. Every message is treated the same. It's like, usually I do this example, which is like Lufthansa sales of tickets as coach class. Actually, there is the opportunity to differentiate for enterprises that wants to deliver messages, and for consumers benefit from that, to differentiate the quality and the routing of messages based on the nature, on the content of the message itself. And that's what the problem we're trying to solve right now, and provide visibility of what goes through the network. And of course, new technologies like deep neural networks and machine learning helps a lot in that. So it's something that happens automatically.
Do you want me to address the same question? Well, messaging is growing very fast. I think that most of the companies in the industry are high growth companies. We experienced like a 30% year-on-year growth rate, and this is very good news to all of us. Nevertheless, there is a little bit of uncertainty under different perspectives. There are new technologies coming, like RCS. New regulation coming, like GDPR, and in general there is a lot of internal competition within the industry trying to leverage proprietary technologies to try to get the lead of this growth. Actually, this is against the interest of the industry itself, and it's definitely against the industry of the demand side of the industry, where basically my take is that most of the consumer want to get services and content from their preferred brand and service provider. And they don't care about the technology, and they don't care about the complexity. So I think that being in between, our role should be to simplify as much as we can this relationship between the consumer and the brands. And that's exactly what we have been trying to do over the last, let me say, 19 years. And we will keep on doing, trying to get rid of the complexity, which unfortunately is increasing.
Yeah. And just to add to that, in my presentation I talked about how bullish we were with regards to the future of messaging. I believe that is a true statement, but at the same point in time, I think what all of us should be spending a lot of time trying to figure out is how do you monetize that growth in a profitable manner so that it not only impacts your top line, but it impacts your bottom line too. Yeah. And I think that is going to be key in order to be able to make this ecosystem one that's productive and self-sustaining. Because at the end of the day, if you're not delivering that value that people are ready to pay for, you will not be part of that growth. And so we spend a lot of time trying to figure out what that value is that people will actually pay dollars and cents on. So that's going to be a key part of the future of messaging.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I see the future as being healthy, but there's two, I think, fundamental risks that we face right now. The first one is that the big thing that SMS has going for it, and RCS will likely inherit, is the inbox, right? The fact that it's ubiquitous, the fact that it leverages a global addressing system. I don't think that's going to go anyway soon. I think the absence of fundamental encryption and security in SMS or end-to-end encryption in RCS, I think, is still a problem. And I think that there's probably 20% of the market, which is primarily A2P PIN verification codes that to some degree are at risk if we don't collectively solve that. I think operators are installing firewalls and SS7 firewalls, but we can't move quickly enough, I think, as an ecosystem to really address the security issue. Smishing and faking and spoofing is a big major issue. I think the other obvious trend is what you just touched upon, which is the fact that growth in volumes of messaging is not ultimately what we in this room are looking for. What we're looking for is growth in revenue, growth in bottom line, and I think that those things are not necessarily aligned. So the OTT players who don't have the benefit of controlling the inbox, who don't have the benefit of the global addressing system, many of them will end up offering enterprise communications for free, I think. And so the question is whether RCS and fundamentally the inbox can be maintained by the carriers, by all of us, in a way that addresses the security and the encryption problem, but at the same time isn't given away for free.
Okay, so before we go on and look at the security and encryption problem in a bit more depth, obviously with regulation coming up, GDPR certainly is going to have a big impact in Europe. And again, Rob, based on what you just said in terms of OTT guys looking to offer a free solution, I mean, this is all about the opt-in. And again, under GDPR, a consumer has to opt in to a specific brand and identify an actual channel. So, and again, I guess this will ultimately apply to RTS as well, but how are brands going to do this? How are they going to reach out to these customers and basically say, can we communicate with you over iMessenger or over WhatsApp? So again, we've got to do this whole opt-in process. So do we have any understanding of what a brand or enterprise is going to do and how they're going to address this situation?
So I don't personally, my interpretation of GDPR, I don't see enterprises needing to re-opt in their customers, from a pure messaging standpoint. And I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding.
But if they're going to a different platform, then they will have to.
Sure, and the way that, this problem is not new, right? This problem has existed when people moved from voice to SMS. They would basically do a robocall to the consumer, say, hey, you've opted in for voice, do you want to basically receive a message, via SMS instead? And there's ways and means in which people can opt in via existing channels to other channels. So I don't think GDPR fundamentally changes what enterprises were always obligated to do, and that was to receive consent from the enterprise. I think the difference is that there are a lot of unsavory characters in the world that are sending a large amount of spam, and I think that the fines and the risk of the value chain in carrying that spam, I think that's what's ultimately affected by GDPR.
Okay, guys, anything else?
I think we all also have to acknowledge that GDPR is a great thing, right? Because we've talked about trust for the longest time. Here, consumers are getting control of their data back to them, and then they're allowed to manage that data and really see who reaches out to them and how they do that. And it's going to be standardized across a range of different countries, which I think makes all service providers' lives easier. And going back to the opt-in situation, I think that's very easily manageable. That's very, very easily manageable, both in the OTT thought process or in the existing thought process.
Okay.
Yeah, ultimately, if you have a cleaner industry, consumer will be more engaged. So it should be beneficial in the long term. I'm sure there will be some hiccups. I'm not as positive as Rob, but I think overall, in the long term, it will be beneficial for the industry, definitely.
Well, my take is that GDPR will have an impact in the industry, possibly getting rid from the bad guys who are trying to bullshit the consumer. And it's still unclear to me exactly what will be the actual impact, because basically if you make a rule, you also have to make sure that everybody that do not respect the rule will be fined. And this is still unclear to me. Personally, Kaleyra has no impact on GDPR because the kind of services that we do, mainly on banking, are perfectly compliant with any rule because we are on transaction. We manage like credit card, payment card, and we have to be compliant with a more tight, let me say, a tighter rule, which is the banking rule. But I hope, as Max said, that this is going to create like a moralization of the industry, because the industry of messaging has been, let me say, impacted by bad behavior and malpractices that are absolutely, let me say, useless and counter the interest of all the stakeholders of the industry.
Yeah, but GDPR actually has very crisp and clear identified fines for bad behavior.
Right.
And they are pretty steep.
Yeah,
So I think that
theoretically, I do agree with you.
Yeah.
I've been in an antitrust deal where the fine for the operator could have been up to 10% of the revenues, and then the actual fine has been like 10 million, which is much less than the revenues potentially. So it depends on the application of the fine.
Sure.
Theoretically, it's huge,
always.
but it depends on the
Always the case.
application.
But I think the key difference, prior to GDPR, all of our contracts had indemnities down the value chain, right? So if there was some spammer, at the end of the value chain who sent messages all the way through, to some degree, any fines that you would get, you could pass on, right?
Yeah.
Under GDPR,
Everybody.
well, under GDPR, anybody can be sued. If they haven't demonstrated, good, diligence and good practice in trying to stamp that out, and I think that's a big deal.
And you bet they're going to go after one big company very quickly just to make a point.
Hard to say.
Presumably.
Bound to. Okay, so are the consumers do we have the trust of the consumers? I think it's safe to say, and again from the research that we've been doing, looking at how consumers engage with companies, more and more are signing up to it. Personally, and from the data that we see, our belief is that consumers aren't precious with their mobile number anymore. I guess the way that social media has enabled, that kind of picture into someone's world has changed how they view their own private life, and a lot of people want to share that. And I think it's the same with their mobile number these days as well, because also I think there's an element of utility within that, where you share your phone number with a business, with the brand, a shop, whatever. You know that potentially if you've got a delivery coming, they will send you a text, or you hope they will, and they will tell you when that delivery will come, maybe within the next 10 minutes, and you have to be in for that period. So they've saved you your time, you don't have to take the day off work, etc. But, that's the value exchange. So, from what we're seeing, I think that's one of the main reasons why we're seeing this growth in enterprise, and why enterprise are starting to really adopt that, because consumers are embracing this far more than they ever have. But, can they trust this channel now? I mean, it's coming back to what you were saying about security and encryption. Is enough being done? Because we're looking at SMS firewalls. You could argue that's operators protecting their revenues. SS7 firewalls would be an operator potentially protecting their customer and their brand. So, what potentially needs to be done? How fast does it need to happen? And how big a threat is out there for these mobile operators and the consumers?
See, from my perspective, just based on what I believe is going on in the industry, I can bet you that consumers trust their social platforms more than they trust stuff that they would receive on traditional SMS, because of the legacy baggage and their experience. That is basically the path that they've gone down, right? And so that remains a huge problem even today, of how do you address that, and does that filter into RCS in some ways, as RCS is enabled by those same operators, is a huge question mark. But trust is a huge concern, and I believe that consumers, and I don't have data to back me up, I believe consumers trust their social platforms more than they trust some of these other platforms. I don't know.
I don't know. I have a different perspective. I think social platforms are a pool type of experience. You go there and when you get an SMS, it's very similar to an email, and in this regard, I think the ecosystem has done a fantastic job. If you compare with email, right, it's completely unuseful since probably 15 years. So I think overall, the trust is an issue. Don't get me wrong. I'm there. I'm with you. But overall, I think the ecosystem has done a good job in keeping the channel still usable. Since you presented the data that SMS are read, within 3 minutes, like in a very high 90% of the cases. I think, to your point, the there is an issue there of trust, and there is the upcoming RCS, which opens up new use cases. So it's very important to increase the quality, because potentially there is an uplift, and the numbers are growing very, very fast. So and the firewall, I don't think is enough. In fact, we thought we have a market opportunity where we launch a product that is called Context, by the way, that analyzes the content of the messages and is able to bitmap the content and understand what is spam, even if it comes from different originating networks, from different SIM boxes and things like that. So the problem is there. I think it needs to be addressed soon. I think many companies are working in this space. And I think Nick presented that the firewalls are growing. Gray routes are projecting to go down significantly. That's something that we need to work very, very fast and trying to solve it. Like in the next few quarters, and let's say few years.
Yeah. So I would say that there is a difference between A2P trust and P2P trust.
Right.
In other words, if I got something from a friend of mine on Facebook, I would trust that was my friend that was communicating with me, probably more than potentially on SMS. But if I got something from a WhatsApp message from a business, I don't think I would necessarily trust it. So I think there is a difference between those two.
But if you had opted into that business and you were getting a message, then you would trust it.
Sure, no, I agree. But I think there's two fundamental points that I'd like to make. The first one is that the vast majority of spam doesn't come from grey routes. I mean, they come from SIM farms and they come from legitimate routes. And that's just simply because we find it very difficult as an ecosystem to know who our customer is. Particularly if you have an online sign-up portal where anybody can basically sign up and start sending immediately, it's very difficult to determine who your customer is. My point, my last point is that if people didn't trust SMS, then phishing on SMS wouldn't be a big problem. And it is a huge problem and an urgent problem. The fact that people are getting bank messages from their bank or what they think is their bank every day, and they're clicking on the link and giving away personal information, to me suggests that they trust that. Today they trust it. They may not trust it in 5 years' time, but today they do.
I do agree. The trust is not on the channel. The trust is between the brand and the consumer. Right. So if there is a relationship between the brand and the consumer, the service and the consumer, and there is the trust, then the channel has to be compliant with that attitude and has not to fail in delivering the right thing. So basically, I believe that the trust of the consumer is much more related to the existence and the goodness of the brand rather than on the channel. And this is true for messaging, for email, for whatever the channel you use. At the end of the day, I'm a consumer. I want to talk to my retailer. I want to talk to my bank, my service provider. And that's my interest. And no matter what's the mean that I use, it could be SMS, it could be SMS Premium, it could be SMS Bulk, it could be instant messaging. Now we are pretty much working on voice because in Asia Pacific, where we work pretty much, and I am amazed by the width and the growth rate of Asia in your forecast, in your market forecast. Voice is getting a very significant momentum. It's application-to-person voice, basically, and it's a new way to interact between the brand and the consumer in a context where the consumer is accessing the services through mobile. And in general, if you access the service through a mobile, not necessarily you can allocate all of your attention to the texting, because maybe you are working, maybe you are driving your car, maybe you can't focus on the screen. And voice is much more convenient. And video are on the same path, I believe. I do believe that the relationship and trust relationship has to be between the brand and the consumer. And we, as a service provider, should be consistent with this.
Okay, I mean, that kind of sets it up nicely to where messaging's going, how our brands really looking to communicate with consumers over multiple channels. So, Rob, you mentioned CPaaS. So I'm sure everyone knows what CPaaS is, but I mean, you've highlighted quite a good opportunity there, but you seem to be bringing in other elements around voice and video with messaging. So how does that actually work? And
Yeah, CPaaS I think is probably one of the most understood term in the market, simply because it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I'll give you my interpretation of what CPaaS is. So CPaaS is both a business model and a product set. So I'll talk about the product set first. So CPaaS, to some degree, is solving the fundamental problem that many SMS companies have been solving for decades, which is making it easy for an enterprise to communicate on a global scale. Right? But the key difference between CPaaS and the traditional aggregator, in my view, is that we're used to selling telecom protocols. We're used to selling SMPP. We're used to selling to people who understand how to integrate into those. We sell to people who understand that in France you have to basically encode the message this way. You have to send it between these hours, and in India you have to basically do this and that. And what's happening is more and more enterprises are wanting to buy directly from companies who can do this on a global scale. So the fact that more and more enterprises are buying SaaS means that more and more enterprises are wanting to try and develop and integrate directly into companies like ours. But as long as we carry on doing it in a telecom way, they're not going to want to do that. So CPaaS, to some degree, from a product standpoint, is moving closer to the enterprise, moving closer to essentially, ultimately addressing that need. But in terms of a go-to-market strategy, it's about selling online, it's about making it easily accessible, it's about basically allowing people to buy without necessarily talking to a salesperson. But it doesn't have to be. CPaaS can be all of those things that I mentioned earlier from a product standpoint and still have traditional sales without online sales.
So, obviously this session is about the future of messaging. So is CPaaS positive to the growth of messaging? Could it have a negative impact if we're looking at different kind of channels with voice and video, especially what you're saying around more companies using voice? So, what kind of impact could this have?
CPaaS at the end of the day is a great delivery platform. And because it's a convenient delivery platform, it will help more people gain access to messaging. But CPaaS, in my mind, is not just limited to messaging. It can be leveraged for a range of different services.
I know, that's what I'm saying, but will it have a negative impact on
No,
messaging?
I don't think it'll have a negative impact. I think for a certain segment of the market, not for the entire market, a certain segment of the market that wants to quickly leverage a set of APIs and integrate these features into their environment, and off they go, and they get a global capability. I think it's an amazing means of, and I think companies like Twilio, Nexo, and others have made a great business of it. So it helps the ecosystem, right? I don't think it addresses the entire market, and it just cannot by the inherent nature of the way it's structured. But I think it helps the ecosystem.
Okay.
I am absolutely in line with what Rob says, because communication platform as a service, C+, basically it's a way to shade the complexity of our technological environment in front of the brand. The brand wants to communicate to the consumer, want to give services to the consumer. They don't want to cope with the complexity of the industry that we all together have built with the help of the mobile network operators. So basically, I see this as a means to shade that complexity and to keep on providing new services and new opportunities to communicate to the consumers, which are absolutely virtually any possible. Even a pigeon could be part of the cheap CPaaS, in my perspective. I don't care. I'm not in love with any specific piece of technology.
Pigeon as a service.
Pigeon as a service, right.
Pass. In fact, the
Peas.
Right, okay. I realise time's cracking on, and just as alcohol's been brought into the room. RCS. Bit of a head scratcher, let's be honest. So who's RCS for? Is it for the enterprise? Is it for the operator? Is it the consumer? And who's going to benefit from it? So that's the first question. So we'll discuss that quickly. And the next one, pricing. Who's got to drive pricing? Because I believe all the operators are arguing about whether it's session, whether it's per event, per message, what's a session, how long's a session, is it time, is it number of messages? So until someone makes a stand, we're only really going to be looking at trials and demos, which are great and fantastic, but at some point someone's going to have to put their head above the parapet with a commercial launch. So let's start. Max,
right, let me go first. So I think ultimately it's going back to your first question. I think it's not working anymore. Yeah. The RCS is a long term for the consumer, for consumers, right? They will get benefit. The question is if then at the end it will be just the benefit of Google. That's my question mark, because the business model is unclear, and we'll get to that in a second. But if RCS is delivering the promise, which I think eventually it will, consumer will benefit from it definitely. It's iMessage on Apple on iPhone. It's an amazing way to keep consumers engaging with the device.
Okay, who's next?
From my perspective, I think I'll provide a slightly contrary view. I think there's a lot of celebration going on with regards to RCS leading up to this event. And there was a press release that GSMA put out today. I'm sure you guys have read it. But they said by the end of this year, there'll be about 149 million RCS subs across the globe.
There's 159 now.
159 million. So if you put that in perspective, 159 subs across how many operators, Nick?
55.
So 155 million subs across 55 operators. There are 5 billion mobile phones out there. SMS reaches all those devices. If there is no ubiquity, would it make business sense to leverage the power of RCS if that power actually arrives? And then people haven't addressed the 500-pound gorilla in the room, Apple. Apple's not giving access to that mailbox ever. And so that just takes away a huge chunk.
Can you confirm that?
Yeah, absolutely. As of today, unless somebody knows otherwise, Apple has not come to the party. They've been invited multiple times. Google has their own self-interest. Again, we leverage RCS technology too, but we have to be realistic. So even by next year this time, you're up to 400 million subs across 200 operators. The actual number within each operator's footprint still remains small, right? And so whether it's free or whether it's paid or whether it's a business model that makes sense, I think the first issue that needs to be solved is get deployment going faster, get Apple to the party, make it real, then price will figure itself out.
Do you think then that it won't survive if it's just Google? Does it need Apple
I
to create
think
the market?
in today's day and age, means how many people use the iPhone?
Yeah, I mean, I would just jump in here.
These guys would never get a message.
I would jump in here and I would just remind us all that 90% of SMS traffic originates and terminates in one country. In other words, messaging ecosystems are countrywide, they're not global, unless you're a global multinational and you need to basically communicate to every country in the world. The vast majority of companies want to communicate to consumers, and the vast majority of companies have consumers in one country, right? So there are countries like Brazil, South Africa, India, Indonesia, where Android penetration is off the charts, right? I mean, literally, it's practically ubiquitous. So to say that RCS is not going to succeed depending on Apple, I think is very true in Western Europe. And in North America. I don't think it's true in emerging markets. I think that RCS can be incredibly successful there. But to your question, which is, is it going to succeed? No question, we have a lot of work to do to basically get there. But I think that the underlying, and even if you put Google's motivations aside, I think the underlying problem that enterprises have today is that we've had 10 years of huge amounts of growth and hysteria around apps. But the latest stats seem to suggest that apps just don't work as well as they used to. They're more expensive to maintain, nobody downloads them, and even when they do download them, they never open them. So from an enterprise standpoint, we're currently stuck with SMS, which is ubiquitous, or some of these micro ecosystems like WhatsApp or Facebook, and depending which country it is, it depends on what the penetration is. So for me, RCS is one of the only answers that I can see, for the future of messaging, where you get the richness of an app without installing an app. And so therefore it comes back down to the inbox.
So very quickly, because I'm sure we have got some questions. Sure we have. How is it going to become successful? What is the pricing model that you would recommend? If there's an operator there, they say, we're going to do a commercial launch next week, we need a pricing model, what will you tell them? Very quickly.
So I would keep it simple, keep it dead simple. Charge it at roughly the same price as SMS or slightly higher, and just basically, deploy it and
So per message,
per message.
1-to-1.
Well, I mean, the reality is that most operators, even if they wanted to, couldn't bill for anything other than per message. I mean,
We're not going down that way.
That's the reality,
One
right?
thing at a time.
Nick, it has to be free to the end user. It has to be free. Means the money
Yeah,
has
no,
to be...
but it would be an enterprise that would pay.
The money has to be paid by the sponsoring brand.
Right.
Because at the end of it has to be, and that can be a whole different ballgame, because now you're talking about enterprises reaching their consumers, and are there existing advertising models that they used to use those models?
So
That's the
advertising
brand
funded.
for the brand.
Is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
Advertising funded.
Absolutely.
I agree with both of you.
So a price per
with both
message
of them.
ad funded model.
It's two ways. No, well, it has to be paid by the sender. Let me say, it has to be paid by the sender, and if the sender is an enterprise, the enterprise should pay the cost of RCS, and it has to be seamless and simple for the user. But the real question to me is, what kind of problem or need this technical solution?
No, that's not the question. What's the price point? What's the price point? How are we going to do the price?
We are talking about marketing, so when you talk about marketing, if it's better if you start from the needs. What I really don't understand is if the needs is a consumer needs or the need is the operator needs to try to recover a situation that has been jeopardized by iOS and Android with rich communication.
Right, Max, quickly.
Very quickly, I compare RCS a lot with email, so I don't see advertising play there, and so it's either per message or per number of users that you want to reach, something like that.
Brilliant, thank you. Do we have any questions? We do, brilliant.
The South Africans. To Rob's point, we talked about the emerging markets that has an RCS Android environment, so RCS could really work. I think one of the slides showed that the emerging markets has around 52, well, the globe has 52% in terms of smartphones. The other point is that in emerging markets, you probably find that's a little different. Internet protocol for RCS, yes. That's not going to reach all the consumers. So SMS still remains the largest point. So how would you see that in terms of some of the countries you mentioned, Rob?
So, I mean, there's no question in my mind that SMS will coexist with RCS for the next 5 to 10 years. There's no other way. And so I think it's up to us to figure out how we can allow that coexistence to happen while still growing RCS. Because there's no question, if there's no data, like if somebody doesn't have a smartphone, somebody doesn't have data, you have to basically continue to use SMS. So this is a slow burn, but nothing in telecoms happens in 3 years, right? I mean, SMS, to get to where we are now, it's 30 years old, right? It's 25, 30 years old. So 5 to 10 years is the horizon that I think we're going to get to, where there'll be a tipping point where RCS will outnumber the amount of SMS. But we need to create these hybrid solutions now to allow, at least for those people who have the ability to receive RCS to enjoy that benefit.
Kind of question, kind of just a comment. I think WhatsApp will not offer messaging for free, so they'll definitely somehow make money. And I'd love to hear your view of what impact do you think they will have. So Facebook Messenger is out there and people's using it, APIs using it. There's a few types of WhatsApp messengers that people are starting to test. But once the enterprise WhatsApp API comes out and there's a business model around it, what do you think the impact will be? Because we all know that the popularity of WhatsApp surely is going to have a slightly different impact than Messenger and others. So what do you think the impact will be? On RCS, my view, I tend to agree with you, that if I have SMS and someone mentions maybe slightly more than SMS, I have to pay for sending RCS, or I'm thinking of, I've got my phone now, and I must use something else other than my SMS to send SMS, and or my WhatsApp, or my new platform to communicate with my enterprise. I also struggle to see kind of where RCS will somehow get into my heart for me to actually use it, or just another means. So I'm hoping it'll somehow grow messaging as a whole, but I tend to think we should rather put our hopes on other means.
Thank you. So what's the impact of WhatsApp for business, of messaging and potentially for RCS?
So I think from a messaging perspective, WhatsApp has revolutionized messaging, right? Because they are the first pioneers in the OTT approach, right? And consumers spoke very loudly by selecting WhatsApp as their favorite means of communication, right? You were talking about India. Today in India, India is WhatsApp's single largest market by user. And WhatsApp will continue to add subscribers because they'll continue to deliver value. So I feel RCS is a little further behind, right? And so while RCS plays this catch-up game, I don't think WhatsApp's going to sit around and do nothing, right? And like you said, going back to what you said, if they open up and say, okay, go ahead, reach out to the end users based on certain policies and certain rules, it opens up that 1.3 trillion subs is the last number I heard from WhatsApp, right?
Billion? You mean billion?
In the billion, excuse me, yeah. But right,
amount of people
understood. But 1.3 billion, right? And that's an extremely impressive number, and that's a huge number. That provides a level of ubiquity too, even in a country like India, where everybody has WhatsApp, right? They be in multiple carriers, but they all have WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And I think that is the point of ubiquity. So I think WhatsApp is a huge role to play, and if operators are not able to deliver a compelling RCS proposition that people will enjoy, will engage users, and keep them, coming back for more, it's not going to work, because that's what WhatsApp has going for them, right?
Yeah, I would just add that we should not underestimate WhatsApp. I mean, they've demonstrated their ability, to grow and to succeed and to deliver value, no question. The enterprise API will have an impact, no question. I would just counter that fear and doom, sort of scenario with the fact that WhatsApp still has to monetize their platform. I don't know how much money they're spending, but it's in the billions to basically run the infrastructure today. So, at some point, they will have to monetize, I guess. It could be next year, it could be in 10 years' time. But also, as to your presentation, millennials are incredibly fickle, right? Snapchat went from the darling of the industry to, potentially not the darling, within a couple of years, just because whatever's cool is cool and whatever is not is not. And so I just wonder whether at some point when WhatsApp really needs to monetize, whether their dominance will continue to be enjoyed as they do today. It's a question, I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
Just one comment. I'm not sure WhatsApp is not monetized today, because otherwise I don't explain why. This morning I was talking with my wife about doing a trip to Cuba, and then I saw a Cuba advertisement 1 minute later on my Instagram feed. So it's not. I'm not sure if Facebook is not.
They monetize on the DMP.
They'll be advertising RCS on there tomorrow. Right, do we have any more questions? Last one.
Okay. Do you think that anyone will market RCS, or will it just start appearing on people's phones and they'll sort of discover it? Or will Google, will the operators, will the aggregators, will the brands actually have to start marketing it? And if they do, will they call it RCS?
No, I think the question before, I don't want to have a third one. I already have SMS and WhatsApp. It's not really true. So when you get the new RCS-enabled phone, right, you will use the message app, the basic message app that will work on SMS or on RCS mode, and you won't realize it. I mean, you will realize it because you will get like rich messaging, right? You will get like a map or something. So it will be like seamless for consumers, right? So if you have the Pixel, like I do, sometimes I do RCS sessions with my, peer-to-peer, not with enterprises, but it happens today to me, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see anybody really marketing RCS. I think that. Right now, I think there's one global group operator who has about 10% of their subscriber base who is RCS enabled, and they don't even know it. The reality is that most subscribers have come to expect, a rich messaging experience, and when they receive it, I think they'll go, oh, that's nice, But there's no point in marketing it, because at the end of the day, they're expecting it, and it's there, right? So I do think that
Who's expecting it?
The subscribers is
No, they're not.
expecting it. Well, I mean,
If you go onto an operator forum where they've launched RCS, they've got hundreds of consumers that are saying, "What's happened to my messaging? I don't understand. I want the messaging back." So clearly, some educational process is going to be needed.
have you been reading all the forums?
Yep.
So I can't really counter that, but my point is that in their WhatsApp day-to-day experience, they expect to basically be able to send a message to their friend with with a photo or whatever it is. The day that it starts working miraculously in their inbox, I don't think they're going to be like, "Wow, that's new. I'm going to tell all my friends about it." They'll just be like, "Oh, that works, and I don't have to use a WhatsApp anymore." I mean, I'm not sure marketing will make any difference at all.
Operator.forum.com.
No.
No, one thing I think, Nick, I was in one GSMA labs for RCS, and I think it was someone from Google that said the main reason why people don't switch away from iPhone to Android is because of iMessage, because they love iMessage. So I think there is a huge consumer demand for a better messaging experience that, of course, similar to WhatsApp on the basic messaging app on the phone, to your point. And which, by the way, brings to the reason, if iMessage is one of the key differentiators for iPhone, why should Apple join the RCS bandwagon and let Google to automatically have,
it's good news for aggregators, I guess. Right. I think we'll wrap it up there. If you do have any questions, hopefully our panelists are staying for a drink. Excellent.
Drink is always a good idea.
Right. Well, on behalf of myself, and obviously thank you to MEF for hosting this and also for their party last night, which is fantastic. Guys, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate that. So please give them a big hand.